Good morning and welcome to another Seize the Day. Today is Tuesday, January the 23rd, and we get another opportunity to share together. Trust you guys are waking up feeling refreshed and ready to begin a new day. I'm still down here in Mexico, and time difference is a little different. So um, I was so into sharing the word yesterday that I failed to notice how the sky behind me was changing, and I thought, in afterthought, that was really awesome. So I'm going to have to pay attention a little bit more today. Um, I'm where we're staying. They put out this little buffet for breakfast, and so there's this little setting that people like kind of here. Maybe I could do this real quick. Just kind of show you a little bit. They there is this little place where they put and set it up for people to have breakfast when they get going around 6:30. So now one of the waiters, he asked me what have I been doing, and so I come, and there's one table that isn't set up, so I could just sit here and do my devotions, and so I'm grateful for him. He's been a good partner. And so I just come in here. By the time I'm done, people are starting to line up on the beach to see the sunrise, and I feel like we've had a good start to the day. So glad that you're here. Glad that we're entering into this word together. Being reminded also of God's great power. Every day this sun is coming up. And so, yeah, good day. Well, we're in the midst of a study called This is Life. And we've been looking at a passage in Luke chapter 16. And it's all about managing life. And the interesting thing in this passage is that Jesus tells a parable that um, has often been one of those parables where people look at and they're trying to get a sense of what Jesus is really trying to communicate through the passage, because it asserts a number of things that catch us a little bit by surprise, doesn't it? So, for the benefit of those perhaps who are just tuning in today and have not had an opportunity to really hear this parable, I'd like to read it again because we're going to go around looking at some other unique things about this morning, all about again, to keep the theme in front of us. This is life is all about what we would point to and we would say in a confident, positive way, this is life. And sometimes you can look at your children, right, your family, and go, hey, this is what life is all about. But like so many things, we could take the good and make it the ultimate. And suddenly now it's a part of life, but it's not really the entire life. And one of the things that Jesus has been saying us is, look, don't allow a concept of all of your possessions to define what is life for you. You have to be rich towards God. You have to be seeking after his kingdom. Don't worry about all these things. Your father knows you have need of them, right? This is another one of those insights on what life is really all about. And this parable of the unjust steward highlights a couple of other facets for us of what life really should be all about. And that's exactly what this whole series is designed for, to just give us a new understanding. And then we're going to make this shift into this book called Rooted. And if you haven't picked that up, I would recommend the book. You could contact our office, and we can give you all the information there. Um, I should always have this up there, but I always fail to. So it's just Bethany Church, .com, and this is this is also one of those. This is our website, and if you ever want to send me a question or you want to communicate, you could obviously put it in the comments as we're having the show. I try to take a time afterwards to go through some of those. Some of you have put down prayer requests, and I add those to mine. But if there's a particular question or something you have, just send it to bethanychurch.com. We'll give you some information about all the rooted studies that we're doing, because I'm going to be doing that during our Seize the Day programming. So I'll leave that up there for you. But let's go back to now Luke chapter 16. And what I'd like to do is going to read the parable for you. All right. So it says here, it says, Jesus told his disciples, there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So it's not the rich man. This is the one who works for that rich man. So he's a steward, right? He's the manager of his rich man's possessions. And he is doing a terrible job. He's wasting his possessions. So the rich man calls him in and asks him, he says, what is this I hear about you? So something about his reputation has already preceded him. People know that he's been doing a lousy job. Have you ever had a job like that where you could be, in a nanosecond, everybody in your office, right, or on a crew that you're working with, they know who works hard and who doesn't, who's always skating, who's always looking for the shortcut, right? Their reputation goes before them. So he says, what is this I hear about you? He says, I want you to give an account of your management, because you cannot be manager any longer. So now the manager is in a crisis. And he's thinking to himself, what am I going to do now? My master has taken away my job. And he starts to reflect on that. And you can almost hear the panic arising in his voice. He says, listen, I'm not strong enough to dig. And I'm ashamed to beg. And then all of a sudden, as he's thinking and thinking, he comes up with a strategy. He says, I know what I'll do when I lose my job here, so that people will welcome me into their houses. He goes, so he called in each one of his master's debtors. And he asked the first, how much do you owe my master? Well, 800 gallons of oil, he replied. And the manager told him, take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 400. So now he is, just cutting down the inventory, right, that is owed to his master, to the rich man. Then he goes to the second. He says, how much do you owe? He says, 1,000 bushels of wheat. He says, well, take your bill and make it 800. And this is the strange part in this parable, because the master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. There's something about this code among thieves, right? Like, if the master is commending the dishonest manager because he acted shrewdly, I wonder if that's how the master treated other people, right? And so now he's looking at this manager who has not been doing a great job. And it's strange, right, that he commends the dishonest manager because he acted shrewdly. And then Jesus adds this to the story. He says, for the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. So you see, like here's something that I want you to think about. When Jesus begins to now speak into this parable, he does a couple of things. One, he makes a differentiation between the people of the world and the people of the light. He's talking about worldly riches over against eternal riches. So these are the two broad categories that Jesus is bringing to our attention. And as he does that, he wants us to begin now to start thinking in these categories. Because otherwise, this parable is not going to make any sense at all. How are you going to commend somebody for doing something terrible? But here he says, look, the people of the world and the people of the light, they're different. And worldly riches and the management of those things and eternal riches, they're different too. So let's go back now to this Luke chapter 16 and finish up with our story. He says, he goes on, he says, well, whoever could be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. Whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who's going to trust you with true riches? And if you haven't been trustworthy with someone else's property, who's going to give you property of your own? Right? Because the manager was mishandling the rich man's property. And he says, if you can't be trustworthy with somebody else's property, how are you going to do that for yourself or with property of your own? And so he says, no servant can serve two masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or he'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Right? The Pharisees who loved money heard all this and were sneering at Jesus. And he said to them, right, to the Pharisees, the religious leaders of the day, he says, you are the ones who justify yourselves in the eyes of men, but God knows your hearts. And what is highly valued among men is detestable in God's sight. So we began to look here and we saw that this was all about managing resources. And what Jesus is beginning to say to us is, how are we supposed to manage those resources? Because it's going to say a lot about what we value in this life. And if the whole topic here is, how are we going to define that good life? What are you going to point to? Well, I'm certainly not going to point to this unjust steward. But what is Jesus trying to use this story to communicate to us? What counsel are we to take away from this story? And you see, it's all about managing God's resources. And so look at verse 16, chapter 16, verse 9. So in verse 9, he says, look, I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you'll be welcomed into eternal dwellings. I want you to think about here when he talks about worldly wealth, right? This worldly wealth is the wealth that is confined to the world as we know it today, right? This world in which we live in. It's the stuff that we accumulate for ourselves. And how we manage that is saying a lot about our priorities and who we are as people. But notice here, worldly wealth, it all belongs to God, doesn't it? Whether it's the things of this world or the things that we're going to see that he talks about, eternal riches. The rich man was accused and exposed. I mean, the manager was accused and exposed for the careless way he managed the rich man's resources. Everything belonged to the rich man. So to whom does the wealth really belong? It's not his. It was the rich man's. You and I live in this world. Should we not be good stewards of all that really belongs to God? It's his. He created all of the resources that you and I fashion and manufacture into all kinds of personal things that benefit the way in which we spend our days. But he goes on here and he talks about gaining friends, right? This man went to his neighbors to put himself in a good way with their neighbors so that they would welcome them into his home. You remember why? Because he says, hey, I'm not strong enough to dig and I'm too proud to beg. So what did he do? He found a way to connive his way into a good relationship with these people. Now, instead of just looking out for yourself, we're being told here, right? Trying to buy the allegiance of others. He says here, disciples are to use their possessions to gain friends for yourselves. So here, the way in which I am using my resources is to gain friends, but it says to make sure that I'm doing that in a way that now at the end of this life, I'm going to be welcomed into eternal dwellings. So see, this is all about how am I managing the resources that I have. When you notice how here in verse 9, it says, so when it is gone, what is gone? The worldly wealth is going to be gone. It's not going to last forever, right? We came into this world naked, and we're going to leave naked. We're not bringing it with us. You know, that was what we learned in Luke chapter 12, right? About that rich man who had accumulated so much for himself that he had to build bigger barns just to store it. And then he made the assumption that because he had so much, it meant long life. Take it easy, baby. Eat, drink, be merry. But the Lord called him a fool, because his life would be required of him that day. And what is he going to give in exchange for his soul? No, see, here it says, you ought to be using this wealth that really doesn't even belong to you. It belongs to the Creator, the one who has given us all these things. He says, you got to use this to gain friends, so that what? So when it is gone, you'll be welcomed into eternal dwellings. It's not, you notice here it says, when it is gone. Life is short. It's not a matter of if it goes. It's not in the event that it goes, but it's when it goes, because it is going to go. This is not a foundation upon which to build one's life, to pour into and say, this is what my life is all about, because it could turn on a dime. So now is our opportunity to use our resources to make sure that we're expanding God's kingdom and demonstrating faithfulness to the one to whom we will give an account. So notice in the text again, it talks about eternal dwellings. The manager was doing everything he could to put himself in a good position with his neighbors, right? So that he wouldn't have to beg, he wouldn't have to go out there and dig ditches, right? But here we're not just talking about going into someone else's home to welcome me. That's short term. Here it's talking about eternal dwellings. So the eye should always be on the future. Our actions ought to be guided by the values of heaven and not earth. But here's the question. So it says, we ought to be using worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Who are the friends that will welcome you into eternal dwellings? Now, think about that before you answer. Because who is the one that is going to welcome you into this kingdom? Not who is going to be in the kingdom, but who welcomes you into this kingdom? Who opens the door and says, come on in? You see, we have, it says that when people know the Lord and they pass from this life, Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live, right? It tells us in numerous places, to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord, right? That we don't grieve as those who have no hope, right? So this hope of this eternal life is a gift that Jesus is the one who gives. It will be populated with all those who have placed their hope and trust in him. But you do notice that Jesus is the one who is opening up this door to these eternal dwellings. And in this case, this is the favor then of the Father and of Jesus whom he has sent, who has now made Jesus known. I want you to think about that with me for a moment. That means then, read verse 9 again. If I'm using worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. That means that I am to be living my life and using the resources that I have here, not just based on my value system, but I'm supposed to be using all of this based on kingdom principles, which is what Jesus has been teaching all along, hasn't it? That we got to look at your life in light of this revelation that he has begun to give to you and to me. That's why it's so interesting. Like I love looking at these passages in the context in which they were given. But you go back to Luke chapter 15, And just in Luke chapter 15, that's that wonderful story, right? Where Jesus is being attacked by the Pharisees for eating with tax collectors and sinners. And they can't understand why he would even be doing that. He should be shunning them, not fraternizing with them. And then he tells them the stories of those three stories, right? Of a lost sheep, a lost coin, and a lost son. The lost sheep, the man went out and found it. And when he brought it home, he called all of his friends to tell them, hey, I want you to rejoice with me, for I found my sheep. And then it says, and such is the rejoicing in heaven when that which is lost is then found. The lost coin, well, the woman loses this coin in her house. She turns it upside down. And when she finds it, what does she do? She calls all of her friends. She wants them to know, hey, listen, I found this. I found this, and I want you to rejoice with me. And again, it says, and so is the rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents. So we're not talking about sheep, and we're not talking about coins. We're talking about something that people value, and this is then transcended into what's taking place in heaven. When one sinner repents, all of heaven rejoices. This is what Jesus is trying to bring to the mind of these Pharisees who are criticizing him for fraternizing with the sinner. And yet Jesus is saying, look, you really don't your value system is completely upside down. Because just think about it. When you guys lose sheep, you call out everybody to tell them how excited you are. You lose a coin, you call all your friends to tell you found it. But in heaven, people are rejoicing when our heart is changed, when minds now are set on things above, because they are valued. That's why the next story of the prodigal son comes into play, because the prodigal son is like that lost sheep, and the older brother is like the lost coin that was lost in the house. You see? So the three stories, they all come together, and all of which to demonstrate the Father's love, the Father's generosity, everything that the Father does to bring this family back together again. Because why? Because they're valued. And the most important thing is that they are welcomed into these eternal dwellings. So part of the way in which we ought to look at this story is that we have to think about it with this eternal perspective. Every day you wake up, it's not just about this life that is before you. It's about, what am I doing with this life that is reflecting kingdom values? Those values and my association now with this teaching that Jesus brings, this hope that I have now, not only in what he is teaching me, but also what he has done for me. Because Jesus has come to die for your sins and for mine. And so he opens up this door of heaven for you and me. So who are the friends that are going to welcome you into eternal dwellings? It's the Father and Jesus. They're the ones that are going to open wide the door and says, come into the kingdom prepared for you from the foundations of the world. It is Jesus now who, through him, he says, enter through this gate. I am the gate for the sheep. You could come in through me. And that is exactly what he taught in Luke 15, right? About that one sinner who repents. And now he's talking about the same way, not only about how you deal with people, but how you deal with your resources. The way you deal with your resources ought to be a way in which it is reflecting eternal perspectives, that one day God is going to hold me accountable for that. Can I just mention one more thing to you before we go this morning? This whole idea of this stewardship of resources, then, remember in Matthew 25, it's that well-known passage where Jesus separates the sheep from the goats. And he tells them each a question. Well, he makes this statement. He says, when I was sick, you came and visited me, right? When I was hungry, you fed me. When I was naked, you clothed me, right? Like all of that, he says the sheep. He says, now come into the kingdom prepared for you. And the whole reason why Jesus said that, he says, because when you did it to the least of these, you did it to me. And so you begin to realize that how I am dealing with the people all around me is giving insight into the way in which I am maintaining this eternal perspective, recognizing that one day, this life that I'm leading, I'm going to have to give an account to the one who has given me this life and all of this worldly wealth that I have. So, like for instance, for now, like I'm on this little vacation, but I'm not on vacation. I've had opportunities to talk to quite a few people here about faith. I want my life to be consistent wherever I go, the same guy. This passage here in Luke chapter 16 is talking about how we manage life. In 15, it was a way in which we look at people. In 16, it's the way in which we look at our resources. Are we using this worldly wealth to gain friends so that when it's gone, not if it's gone, when it's gone, we will be welcomed into eternal dwellings? You want to manage your resources with an eternal perspective. So now it becomes a stewardship of the way in which I'm spending my time, the way I spend my money, the way I entertain myself. Now this gospel is what is beginning to inform all of my life. Come on, that's good. That's a challenge every day. And you know what? Some days you're going to do great, some days not so hot. And on those days that you don't do so hot, you repent. And you say, all right, Lord, let's do this again. Because he forgives 70 times 7, right? He's not this policeman, like one and done. No. This is all about showing progress. This is all about moving in this direction. But you got to manage your life with this eternal perspective. Otherwise, you're going to get lost in the temporal, and it's going to overcome everything. I appreciate being with you this morning. I hope these lessons, they help strengthen your faith in the Lord Jesus. There is good reason for that. His teaching is the bedrock on which we ought to build. Thank you so much for being a part of this. And Lord willing, we'll spend more time together tomorrow. So on this Tuesday, January 23rd, as the sun is coming up behind me, God bless you, my friends. So appreciate being part of this community. God bless you. And Lord willing, we'll see each other again tomorrow. God bless.